Hi, everybody. So, yeah, kind of a follow up here on my previous article, and it's pretty in depth. So, I'm not going to go over everything in the article here. I'm going to go over two-thirds of it, maybe. But there's even more information in the article that I don't have the time for here, and also a lot of the content isn't monetization friendly. So, in terms of getting into this, this photo here, I actually think it highlights a few things for us. Number one, it gives us a sort of geographical foundation of what we're talking about here. So you can see there the Antonovsky Bridge connecting Oleshki to Antonivka, which is a suburb in the eastern side of Kherson. And this is a sunrise on the morning of September 3rd. And that day was a relatively uneventful day in terms of drone strikes. The first week of September is sort of where we left things off. We hadn't really gone into detail as to why things had changed there. So I'm going to give some answers to some of those questions that were lingering from the first presentation that I did in the first article. We're going to tie that up, and then we're going to kind of go into a little bit of what the attacks have been doing recently. I've been while Joseph was presenting news and German aid to Ukraine was going on, I was catching up on the Telegram channels that I'm specifically tracking to see if they'd done anything new. But nothing that I know of. So what I want to get into is the situation that we have at hand up to the current day. So the current situation, my article left off at September 20th. So I don't have any of this data in my article, but I think it's really important data because we have here the deadliest week in Kherson regarding drones since I've been tracking it. And as far as I'm aware, since the beginning of the war. So as you can see, we've got, I think, 41 people injured between the 20th and the 26th, and then an additional 18 just in the last 3 days. And that's just from drones. Because one other thing that's going on right now in Kherson is artillery and airstrikes have skyrocketed. They really were quiet for a while on that front. We weren't seeing sort of the daily artillery shelling that you might see in Donbass, and the daily like cab and fab strikes that you might see up in Kharkiv or in Sumy or Donbass. It just wasn't very characteristic of Kherson the last 3 months. It was mostly these drone attacks, but we're seeing more of that, and we're seeing more drone attacks too. So it's a pretty dire situation in Kherson right now. And one of the things that's just come up in the last few days, this is actually from the 26th, from the National Police. And it says a 64-year-old man was blown up by a Russian anti-personnel mine in the park. He was taken to the hospital with mine explosive injuries. And what it suggests is that the enemy is carrying out remote mining. So they're using the drones now, not just to drop like 40 millimeter grenades or improvised explosive devices like they had been before, but now they're actually using these little anti-personnel mines that don't really require a whole lot of pressure to go off. And they're not necessarily going to be an injury that kills you, but it will certainly maim any civilian or soldier that steps on this. And we've seen evidence of these specific PF1s being sort of a scourge on the battlefield, I would say, in Kharkiv Oblast. In terms of my tracking of UXO. So this is an interesting development that I'm going to be tracking going forward. So just something to keep an eye on. I want everyone to know about this because I think this remote mining aspect is a completely new development. I did not write about it in the article, but I think it's scary, especially given the casualty count that we have now. It's pretty horrific. So moving into sort of the updates from the article. So in terms of our casualty count here, we're almost at 300, 266 as of the 20th. Of those casualties, 235 were given ages. 71 of those victims were coming just within the first 2 weeks of September. So we can see September was initially showing like it was going to be maybe an improvement, but then the last 2 weeks have been pretty horrific, especially. So the one sort of, I wouldn't call it a bright spot, but one reassuring demographic or data point is the survival rate. Most of the victims are still surviving. We're almost at 94%. And then in terms of some demographic changes, just for those that are interested in sort of the people that they might be targeting, because the thing that drew me to this was the amount of elderly people initially that were being attacked. And that's kind of what got me into tracking the drones. And then this has developed into a completely different situation since then. But we see during this time period here, 40 and 50-year-old victims are much more common. Not so much over 60, not so much under 40. So you can kind of see that even out in the data there, which is interesting sort of at the end there for people that are really into graphs. And also shout out to Chris for the graphics on this, as always. And I think a really useful data point here is, or a way to look at the data is to see a week by week overview, how we can sort of see maybe a little bit of a narrative here through the data. And I'll get into what that narrative is in a second here. So we can see this sort of drop off in the first week of September. Between the end of August, you have that spike at 38, 2 weeks consecutive, 38 casualties. And then it drops down to 8. So why does that happen? I'll answer that. But then we see a spike at 34 and then back down to 27. And we'll get into maybe why that happens as well. And then obviously, if we were to update this data now, we would see actually the highest it's ever been. It would be at 41. So that's pretty disturbing, all things considered. But let's move. Oh, does appear to be frozen. Here we go. Cool. So let's talk about the first week of September in terms of what they were targeting, some reasons why the casualty count might have been lower. First off and foremost, they were targeting objects, more or less, not necessarily civilians themselves, or they might have been targeting the civilians and just not been as successful. That's one potential way of looking at it. In particular, they released a lot of videos through this specific channel, from Mariupol to the Carpathians, of the targeting successively in like 2 separate days, 3 separate attacks as far as I can tell. But they were kind of hanging around this area because they released another video that we'll talk about later, that's right at this same intersection in the middle of Antonivka. And you can kind of see how I provided a sort of close up, and then we get into the scale of everything here, just so everyone can understand the geographical area we're talking about. So it is a graveyard and a funeral home that we have here in the middle of Antonivka, with a lot of military graves. And a source on the ground going by signal has said that some reasons why they might attempt to attack this is because, number one, drivers are going to slow down for turns, right? If you think about it, if you're coming from the coast and heading sort of up to take a left, you're going to have to slow down to get back towards the center of Kherson. So the left-hand turn, you're going to maybe need to stop, let traffic go, and then be able to take your turn. So it provides an opportunity for the pilot to camp out, stalk, and then attack. Another reason is just general terrorism, right? Civilians might reconsider their residence in the city or in the suburbs. And I think depopulation is one of the goals of the Russians in this operation. They do want to scare people to leave ultimately so that they can retake it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But another thing that happens here is it could be specifically to target military personnel that are dealing with funeral services for soldiers, or even targeting the families of those soldiers, or other deceased people, right? Like civilians that have been killed through artillery or drone attacks previously. So it's a pretty disturbing pattern of attacks here, despite them not creating casualties with these specific attacks, as far as we could tell. The video evidence didn't provide any indication that there were civilian casualties as a result of the funeral home attacks. But also occurring within the first week of September, we have this post from Mariupol to the Carpathians in between these attacks, where you can see the intent behind this. It does suggest desecration of graves is a goal behind some of these attacks here. And an interesting fact about this video is there's a network of collaborators that are on the ground that are working with Russian mill bloggers and Russian drone pilots to convey targeting information to them. Right. So this collaborator went through the Antonivka cemetery, and I think the really important part of this here is what to do with these defenders later. Right. The answer is obvious. So it implies tampering with the graves in some kind of way, which is consistent with what we've seen in terms of reports from the national police in the last couple of weeks of people being recruited on Telegram to do precisely that, to go to military grave sites and desecrate them. So that happened yesterday in Khmelnytsky, I believe. Actually, no. It was in Ternopil. I saw a story about that on the National Police website. So this is consistent with a pattern that we're seeing in other areas. In addition to that, some victims. We didn't have very many, right? There were only 8, but of those victims, one was, this was a fairly well covered instance because the victim was fairly well known. He was an oncologist at the local cancer hospital. So inside of Antonivka is kind of nested this little neighborhood called Kandika. And Kandika is the cancer hospital, the oncological hospital for Kherson. So he and his wife were driving, and you can see the same intersection in the photo down at the bottom corner on the left. You can see the pixelated funeral home in that top corner there at that same intersection. And so they took that left turn towards downtown, and it gave the drone pilot enough time to kind of stalk, catch them, and then drop a grenade directly on the driver. It killed the oncologist, unfortunately, which is fairly upsetting, especially since in the video you can see his wife get out of the car to go check on him. So that was pretty disturbing to see that, and then also to see the celebration of that murder as well in the social media platform Telegram in the comments. So moving on, the war on movement. So a quote from that same Telegram channel, he oftentimes posts these, I would say, cover-ups. He posts the video of the attack, of the kill, and then posts sort of a blanket statement that tries to cover up any potential war crime, but it's not necessarily very good at it. So these photos here are dating back to July 25th. So we can see like this war on transportation, the war on vehicles. This is something that's been going on for a long time. And Andrew has been calling attention to this for a year now. And I think that's important to acknowledge. These buses here, oftentimes, and there is some truth to it. Sometimes the buses are used to transport troops to and from places, or police to and from places in large numbers, but it's not consistent with the number of troops that we know to be within Kherson in terms of like making these a viable target. So one thing about these buses is we do see a video during the second week of September where a bus is attacked, and he actually says they knew the bus was empty aside from the driver, but decided to attack it anyways, and then imply that they were trying to create a mass casualty event. Right? They said the next time will be sadder. So that's one aspect of this here. It's not only a war on transportation, it's also an attempt at creating mass casualty events. And I want to talk about this idea of the red zone here. And this is one of the interesting inconsistencies, I would say, with the posting in these Telegram channels. So in order to do this report, I spent way too much time going all the way back through 3 or 4 of these drone pilots and mill bloggers in trying to get an idea of who they were, how long they've been in this area, how long they've been operating, what sort of jobs were they doing? Were they always attacking civilians with drones and we just weren't hearing about it? What was going on there? So I did some investigating, and the inconsistencies here evolve between these two channels. You have Moses and then you have Mariupol to the Carpathians. And in the bottom post here, where there's that sort of long ovular line kind of behind Kherson, we see that that is actually part of a post from Moses where he says, we know that everything basically north of that red line, that's where the main Ukrainian force is. And that's consistent with information that we have. Excuse me. So they still attack people in Kherson itself and Antonivka, despite knowing that the main Ukrainian force, aside from a couple anti-drone teams, as far as the Russians even admit. So they know what they're doing. And over on the other side here is this sort of like, oh my God, it's handmade. I don't know if you can actually tell. If you really look at the images here, you can see gaps in the red because it's like a guy in Snapchat rubbing red highlight over a screenshot of Yandex Maps to try and create this red zone. And that's one way that you know it's really not official in any capacity. But this red zone sort of gives him the ability to attack, according to him, whatever moves within that area. So this, in his way, absolves him of any sort of war crime, we could say. But in reality, what it does is actually it kind of gives us a good idea as to where the war crimes are actually occurring. Because if you look, the red zone declared by Alex Osvodomitel, or Mariupol to the Carpathians, whatever you want to call him, it all fits on the other side of, or the civilian side of Moses's map. So there's a major inconsistency in terms of the logic that they're using in terms of their rules of engagement between the two drone groups that are working together in this area. So I think it's a good idea to kind of take a look at this and look at anything that occurs within the red zone as being a potential war crime. Now, in terms of what can be done about it, we see early in September that drop off, right? That was because Moses, he went off to Kursk. We talked about that in the last stream. But another thing that ends up happening is there's a second drop off in the third week of September. And we see it go from 34 to 27 casualties. So this turning the red zone blue is sort of an idea here where we're employing EW to bring down the drones and interrupt sort of this pattern, right? And the Ukrainian admin we talked about last time had been sort of putting forward solutions with the 124th Marine Territorial Defense Brigade to attempt to bring down some of those Russian drones, the FPVs. And actually, it was just today I did a little bit of looking. They said again that they got more, and it was actually, they said they collected it from the community. So in the 29th, he said the purchase of such systems became possible thanks to financial support of the Khersonska, Novokakhovska, Malivska, Krastivska, Tavernyanska, Chaplinska, Rubanivska, and Prusivvaska communities on the initiative of the Kherson OVA. So we can see that they sort of crowdfunded this system amongst the communities that are still on the other bank of Kherson Oblast to employ these systems. Now, are these going to be effective? I think that's a question that needs to be asked. So from week 2 to week 3, we did see a reduction. So we could say, sure, they were effective. And we actually saw some comments from Mariupol to the Carpathians, where he was raging at the loss of around 8 Mavic 3 drones that they had just received from from Saldo, the occupational governor. So we do see the occupational regime, like I had mentioned last time in the last stream. He is involved in terms of bringing down, bringing aid to the guys operating out of Aleshki. And we'll talk about who those guys operating out of Aleshki are in a different stream. But week 3 to 4, we see this increase from 27 to 41. So is this the EW's fault? Is the EW not working? That's what some people have said. Some less than reliable Telegram accounts that I follow out of Kherson to try and get a more holistic perspective of the situation, consider all the sources, and kind of look at where the truth lies, maybe somewhere in between. But one of them is a critique of the EW itself. Now, I'm not sure that that's necessarily the issue. I would say it might not be the EW's fault, because we also could be seeing here an increase in just the volume of FPVs being employed. So that's one aspect that I think could kind of alleviate the EW from being responsible or ineffective. Additionally, the EW has been targeted by drones and artillery, MRL, cab, fab. All of that in the last 2 weeks has seen a major increase. So any sort of EW that's being employed is immediately a target. And the recon drone situation obviously is allowing for those assets to be targeted fairly easily within Kherson. So it might not be the EW's fault. There's other factors that sort of play into why is the EW not as effective. It could be an increase of volume of attacks. It could also be the EW systems were destroyed. So just to kind of put those fears to bed, this is a video actually from Alex Osvedomitel, or Osvedomitel Alex, however you want to call him, or Mariupol to the Carpathians. This is from his channel, and this is the EW interrupting his UAV that ended up crashing. And we have Andrew's comment here, which I really liked it, so I had to include it. Yeah, it's a pretty low quality attempt at an attack, because they simply cannot see where they are going. As you can tell, that's primitive graphics at best, I think. I'm no software engineer or graphics designer, but that's where I want to leave things off. I don't want to get too far into the perpetrators just yet. I think there needs to be a little more research into who the modern perpetrators are, because I did a little research into who the past perpetrators are, but there's some new accounts, I think, that are connected to this Osvedomitel Alex guy that I want to take a look at a little bit further.
Thank you so much, Brendan. I think I'm gonna try and share my screen and ask you a couple of follow-up questions.
Absolutely.
So I think this red zone that you described is, don't want to necessarily put too much into it, but what do you think is their main goal of this? And do you think they're trying to legitimize their things really? It seems kind of low effort.
Well, yeah, I think low effort is kind of their MO. And in terms of it being, low effort in legitimizing things, they do just kind of put out those blanket warnings where most posts start with those like 2 words where it just says Kherson red zone. So they're using it as sort of a blanket cover for everything. And then they might offer like another detail where they'll say like, Kherson red zone, like, as we all know, all autobuses are potentially targets because the administration is using them to transport fighters from location to location. So you do see sort of like attempts at cover-ups, or just like, in some ways it is even like comedy for them. They do take the opportunity to make jokes too sometimes. So it's really inconsistent is what I would say, because I think it is low effort. I don't think that they're actually trying to cover their tracks, because I don't think they actually think they're going to get caught or held responsible. People might know that they did it, but are they going to be held responsible? I think that might be something kind of in Alex's head, or in some of those other drone pilots.
I mean, maybe they can cover themselves a little bit in Russia on the, but in between the people that follow their channel and maybe donate, etc. Like, yeah, well, it's in the red zone. Like, that's I can buy that in Russia. It's kind of something that the audience would buy as an explanation for what they're publishing. But yeah, I just wanted to show like the impact. So this is from May, 1st of May until today. All the small drone strikes in the Kherson area. And you can see in the city, it's absolutely massive.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also point out that, like, some of those markers, like, you click on it and it's a line from the Kherson ODA, and they're just like, there were 10 drone attacks today in the city. So one drone attack marker could be multiple. It could be just an individual. So it's not always great at representing the entire volume, but I think it does represent volume here. At least all of the blue markers, those are civilian casualties or infrastructure damage from drones alone.
Yep.
So I think that's pretty telling as well. So I mean, we have 300 casualties in 3 months. It's pretty insane, and it's going to get worse. I mean, the leaves are going to fall. That's one thing I didn't really say, is it's going to get worse. When the leaves fall, there's no cover.
Yep.
We'll hit 50 casualties a week easy. I mean, I think we will this week, I'm sure.
Yeah, because you see all the streets there. This is a way for the civilians to kind of move a little bit more safely if they keep under the cover of the leaves. Yeah, something needs to be done quickly here, and I guess there are things that could be done, right? I know that you've been looking to advocate for something to be done about this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on getting some meetings with some Massachusetts elected officials, representatives, and senators, and then trying to lobby for some funding, get some EW in there, because obviously EW is not going to solve the situation. It can be destroyed in other ways. So you do need to keep funding EW capabilities beyond just sort of a one-time donation, I think. And also, I think it's important to point out that EW funding is going to be important going forward, because this is not just going to be Kherson going forward. This is also going to be happening in a larger volume in Kupiansk, and it's already starting to happen in incrementally larger volume in northern Chernihiv, and we saw the attack in Sumy. So it's getting worse in this area specifically, but it's also popping up in other areas as well. So I think it's important to highlight that, kind of like Joseph had said, that there's, like, we're covering these atrocities specifically, but they're occurring everywhere across Ukraine. And I think it's really important to highlight that the drone problem is occurring everywhere across Ukraine as well.
Yeah, I think some more attention to the fact that you can actually finance Ukrainian acquisition of EW systems as a civilian should be brought up, and it doesn't necessarily need to be over a military aid program. It could be just funds transferred to the local units so they can acquire the necessary systems. I don't think EW alone is gonna fix this problem. In my opinion, there's a more kinetic solution to the problem that needs to be followed as well. And to succeed with that, the local drone groups, they need overmatch on the drone capacity. So they need better surveillance drones, and they need a lot more money for higher end, FPV and drones for taking out their adversaries. I think the kinetic solution is probably the best one. Same thing as with the long range strike debate. Don't shoot the arrow, shoot the archer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think like EW systems, like you'd mentioned, they can only go so far. And I think, as you guys have discussed well in depth on Tochnyi before with Daniela and his reports on FPVs, the EW war is sort of nebulous in many ways. But an attackums is very final.
Yeah. Also, like EW is useful in this because by negating the use of the classical hobby kind FPV drone, and also with less advanced antennas, etc. They need to move forward and use more. Let's say they need to use systems that are. It's easier to discover from the sky, and also with SIGINT, because they are a lot more powerful if they want to evade EW. So you are going to force the enemy to expose themselves if they want to continue with what they're doing. So that's one of the reasons EW could be useful as well.
Yeah, we've actually seen how that's worked. The two in tandem. I know this is getting more into the perpetrators, and I said I wouldn't talk too much about it, but if you read the article, there is a specific individual that is mentioned who used to be a drone pilot, and I mean used to be, because he's no longer in existence, because as his job as an artillery spotter and also a drone pilot terrorist, he had to expose himself, and he was taken out by a HIMARS strike, I believe.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, let's work together on on continuing to get eyes on this problem, and also talk to the local politicians that you are in contact with, that this is a big problem. It's easy to link them to articles so you can actually show the data and tell them that, hey, there are units around there that can fix this problem, at least they can do some mitigation to this problem if they are provided with support.
Yeah, I think support to the 124th TRO is really important in this situation, because they're the major unit that's stationed in and around the city, from my understanding.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Are there more questions to Brendan?
I think just one person asked, what's the status of the drone operators? Are they like Army or private? Are they like their own unit, that kind of thing?
Oh, these guys are regular Army. Oh, well, Army, well, Southern District, we'll say that. I mean, technically, some of them are subordinate to the Black Sea Fleet. But yeah, regular Army.
It's not like some PMC.
Yeah, these guys aren't a BARS group. Specifically, these guys we're talking about here.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Brendan, for your recent article, and sharing that with us, and sharing that with everyone else. And look forward to more of your work. I don't look forward to, I guess, the contents of it, but I look forward to you doing it and making a record of it and all that.